After awareness is recognized, and after patterns become visible, something quieter begins to shift. Identity. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in small moments that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. This episode is about that shift, not to define identity, but to notice how it starts to loosen once awareness is present. Most of us live as if identity is fixed. I am this kind of person. I react this way. This is just how I am. Before awareness, those statements feel true, not because they are permanent, but because they've never been questioned. Awareness doesn't attack identity. It observes it, and observation changes the relationship. Identity is built from repetition. Thoughts repeated, emotions reinforced, roles performed again and again until they feel solid. Awareness reveals that solidity is learned, not inherent. One of the first things you may notice is how identity shows up most strongly in reaction. Someone says something. Something tightens. A response appears automatically. I'm the kind of person who doesn't tolerate that. I'm the kind of person who shuts down. I'm the kind of person who has to explain. Awareness doesn't argue with these stories. It notices them forming, and that noticing creates space. Not enough to erase the reaction, but enough to see that identity is appearing, not being proven. That's subtle, but it's important. Identity often speaks in absolute language. Always. Never. Just how I am. Awareness speaks differently. It notices what's happening now, and now is rarely absolute. Another place identity reveals itself is in emotion. I am angry. I am anxious. I am sad. Awareness doesn't deny emotion. It reframes it. Anger is present. Anxiety is moving. Sadness is here. That shift doesn't distance you from feeling. It actually allows feeling to move more freely. Emotion and identity are deeply linked. When emotion arises, identity tries to stabilize around it, to make it mean something, to assign a role. Awareness lets emotion be felt without requiring identity to form around it. That's a major change. This is why awareness can initially feel destabilizing. Old reference points weaken. The mind asks, if I'm not my reactions, who am I? Awareness doesn't answer that question. It lets it dissolve. Identity loosens not because you replace it with something better, but because it's no longer needed to explain experience. Life keeps happening without a fixed narrator. In daily life, this shows up quietly. You notice yourself pausing before reacting. Not always, but sometimes. You notice you don't need to defend a position as quickly. You notice silence feels less threatening. These aren't dramatic changes. They're functional ones. Another thing awareness reveals is how much energy identity maintenance required. Keeping the story consistent, protecting the image, avoiding contradiction. When awareness is present, that effort relaxes. Not because you stop caring, but because coherence is no longer your job. This doesn't mean identity disappears. It becomes flexible. Contextual. You still have preferences, boundaries, values, but they don't harden into who you are. They remain responses to situations. In relationships, this shift is especially noticeable. Awareness reveals how quickly identity forms around being right, being understood, being validated. When identity loosens, listening becomes easier. Not because you agree, but because you're not protecting a role. Emotion also changes when identity loosens. Feelings are allowed to complete themselves. They don't need to be justified or acted out to confirm who you are. They move. They pass. They inform. This doesn't mean you become passive. Action still happens. Boundaries still exist. But action comes from clarity, not reflex. That distinction matters. One of the most confusing parts of this stage is that identity doesn't collapse evenly. Some roles loosen quickly. Others remain tight. Professional identity, family roles, old survival patterns. Awareness doesn't rush these. It meets them as they arise. You may notice moments where identity returns strongly. Old habits flare up. Strong emotions take over. This isn't regression. It's exposure. Awareness is now present inside the pattern, not absent from it. Another subtle shift is how language changes internally. Less "I am this." More "this is happening." Less ownership. More observation. Not detachment, clarity. Identity loosening also brings grief. Grief for old certainty. For clear self-definitions. For the comfort of knowing who you were supposed to be. That grief doesn't need fixing. It's part of reorganization. Awareness allows it. There's also relief. Relief from constantly having to be someone. Relief from defending a position just to stay consistent. Relief from performing coherence. That relief is quiet, but real. In daily life, this shows up as adaptability. You respond differently to the same situations. Not because you decided to change, but because you're not locked into a role. Awareness makes flexibility possible. One of the most important realizations at this stage is that identity isn't the problem. Identification is. Awareness doesn't remove identity. It removes the belief that identity defines you. This is why awakening doesn't turn people into blank slates. It turns identity into a tool, not a prison. You can still be a parent, a partner, a professional, but you're not reduced to those roles. Awareness also reveals how identity often formed around protection, around safety, around survival. Seeing that brings compassion for yourself, for others. People act from identity because it once kept them safe. Awareness doesn't judge that. It contextualizes it. As identity loosens, presence increases. Not as a practice, as a byproduct. You're here because you're not busy maintaining who you are. This stage isn't about finding a true self. It's about realizing you don't need one. Experience is enough. Awareness is enough. You may notice that questions change. Less who am I? More what's happening now. That shift is subtle, but stabilizing. Nothing here needs to be forced. Identity loosens at its own pace. Awareness stays regardless. If this feels unfamiliar or slightly disorienting, that's normal. You're not losing yourself. You're seeing that what you thought was solid is more fluid than expected. Awareness doesn't replace identity with emptiness. It replaces rigidity with responsiveness. And that makes daily life more workable, less defended, less reactive, more honest. You don't need to hold on to any of this. You don't need to remember it. If something resonates, it will return when it's needed. For now, it's enough to notice how identity forms and softens in everyday moments. That noticing is already the shift. If this resonated, you're welcome to stay. You can like the video so it reaches others who may be noticing similar shifts. And if this kind of quiet learning feels supportive, you can subscribe. Not for content, but for continuity. And if you know someone who's feeling disoriented as old identities soften, you're welcome to share this with them. Only if it feels right. Nothing here needs to spread quickly, but sometimes it helps to know you're not alone as awareness meets daily life.